So is this like what we went over on Friday?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll just learn.
Okay, all right. And just lateral to the midline, there are these dorsal trunk muscles called the dorsalis trunci. Okay? If you flip the salamander over, and this poor guy, there is a line running down the ventral midline as well, and that's called the linea alba.
Yeah.
Hey! Hey! All right, so lateral to the linea alba is the rectus abdominis muscles. And then the muscles on the side that are below the horizontal septum, those are your oblique muscles. Remember, we made a window and the top layer was external oblique, the middle layer was internal oblique, and the very last layer, the deepest layer, was the transversus abdominis. Okay, so you should have made a little window in there. Okay, on the head of the salamander, you're going to see a bunch of muscles. The ones that are here along the midline are called the adductor mandibuli internus, or anterior, adductor mandibuli anterior, and then these C-shaped muscles on the top of the head are the adductor mandibuli externus. Okay, so anterior is in the middle, externus is here. If we look on the side of the salamander, there's this big cheek muscle, and that's called the I'm sorry. I don't know why I can't remember these things today. It's a branchiohyoideus, okay? So here on the side is this cheek muscle, and that's called the branchiohyoideus, with an N, branchio. If we lift up this adductor mandibuli externus and look underneath, there's a muscle in there that's called the depressor mandibuli. Thank you. So it's really funny because last Wednesday I had some minor dental surgery done, and they put me out under general anesthesia, and like it's taken me days to recover. I've never had this reaction to anesthetic. It kind of creeps me out. All right.
They use the good stuff.
They use the good stuff. Oh, my poor salamander. Okay, so if we flip the salamander over to the ventral side, what you're going to notice is that, see the corners of the mouth right here? Well, it's kind of cut open on this side, but you see the corner of the mouth right here. It demarcates this this little sheet of muscle that runs from mandible to mandible. That's the intermandibularis. So just below the intermandibularis, there's a thin strip of muscle that runs from side to side, and that muscle is called the interhyoideus. Now, what's covering these big cheek muscles, the branchiohyoideus muscles, is a sheet of muscle that runs from the gular fold up to the line of the interhyoideus, and that's called the sphincter coli. Okay, so you have intermandibularis, interhyoideus, sphincter coli. If I cut through these muscles, and you see how thin they are, they're just really thin strips, you'll see down the midline that there's a pair of muscles that runs from the chin to about this area, and these are the geniohyoideus muscles. I think genioglossus is on the list. It's just this little teeny muscle right here, but I'm not going to ask it because it's too small. I always never have success pinning it. Okay, so aside from your geniohyoideus muscles right here, you can see this big muscle right here. That's actually the branchiohyoideus. So the sphincter coli covers the branchiohyoideus. All right? And look to the neck muscles right here. These muscles are arranged in like a V shape, so you'll see them like a V shape like this, or chevrons. These muscles are called the rectus cervicis. And these big muscles, these big strap-like muscles right here, are the procoracohumerales muscles. And if you look deep to those, there's a muscle right here underneath. Okay, that is the omarcule, spelled funny. O-M-O-A-R-C-U-A-L, omarcule. Okay, so the next thing you want to do is look over on the side of your salamander, especially on the side where you cut off the gills. And what you'll see is that there are a fan of muscles that come up from the dorsal side of the gills like this. This fan of muscles is called the levator's arcuum. Okay, so it's these muscles right here. Levator's arcuum. And then there's a big muscle that's kind of on its own. It's at the end of the fan right here. And that's the dilator laryngeus. Okay, so these ones that are dorsal to where the gills are the levator's arcuum and the dilator laryngeus. Now, if we look ventral to where the gill slits are, under, what we want to do is you want to pull the arm down and across the body. And what you'll see here is that there are two strip-like muscles that are right about where the dilator laryngeus is. There's this one. That is the pectoris scapularis. And then there's this one right here, which is the cucularis. Okay, so these are arranged like a fan too, but they're arranged like a fan from just behind the gills, the external gills, to across the shoulder. Okay, so the first one is the pectoris scapularis. The second one is the cucularis. This third one covers the shoulder blade here. It covers the scapula. It's called the dorsalis scapulae. And then finally, there's this little flap right here that goes from the back to the shoulder, and that's called the latissimus dorsi. Okay, so you have another fan of muscles like this. You have pectoris scapularis, cucularis, dorsalis scapulae, and you have latissimus dorsi. Okay? All right. So, oh, the thigh muscles. I hate these so much. Okay. So, these muscles, there are 1, 2, I would say 3 muscles that are on the body, and the rest of the 4 other muscles are on the leg. Okay, so the first one is this triangle right here. This triangle on the body right here is called the, hold on, pubo-ischio-femoralis externus. Okay? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the muscles on the body first, and then I'll do the muscles that are on the leg, and then we'll go through them all. Okay? So that top triangle right here is your pubo-ischio-femoralis externus. If you peel apart these muscles here, you can see there's a little muscle that's running deep to these 2 leg muscles from the body here. There's a little better... Okay, so right about here, there's this muscle that runs deep to there. That's the ischio-femoralis. Ischio-femoralis. And then finally, there's this muscle here that runs from the body's midline all the way out to the leg. And that's the pubo-ischio-tibialis. Okay, so you have up top, pubo-ischio-femoralis externus. The deep muscle that runs down here is the pubo, or the ischio-femoralis, and this muscle right here is the pubo-ischio-tibialis. Okay, so when we look at the leg now, there's a muscle that's dorsal and on top of the leg, be kind of like a quadriceps muscle, I guess. This is the pubo-ischiofemoralis internus. Okay, the next muscle on the leg, right here, is the pubo-tibialis. Now, remember that the third muscle on the leg actually extends from the midline of the body out to the leg, and that was the pubo-ischiofemoralis. The final muscle, this one right here, which is your hamstring muscle, that's called the ischioflexorius. Okay, so you have pubo-ischiofemoralis externus. The deep muscle is ischiofemoralis. This muscle right here that goes from the midline to the leg, pubo-ischiofemoralis. On the top of the leg, you have pubo-ischiofemoralis internus. The second muscle is the pubo-tibialis. The third muscle you see is that pubo-ischiofemoralis. And then the fourth muscle, the hamstring muscle, is the ischioflexorius. Okay? All right, let's do, what we're going to do today, the veins and arteries. Oh, there aren't many. Sorry. I'm really having a hard time. I should drink more water, I think. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do is you want to cut your mud puppy's mouth and neck open. And you want to do that on the side where you maintain the gills. Okay, so you don't want to mess up your muscles on this side. So basically what I did was I cut through here and I removed all the skin from the dorsal part of the mouth. This hard area here is the hard palate. The mud puppy has a tongue as well. And when you get to the area where the gills come off, that's called the glottis.
Which one is the hard palate? Where you have your fingers? Okay.
Yeah, so you can kind of tell us. The other thing that you want to notice is that the salamander has these bony plates in its mouth, and they have little serrated teeth on them. Those are called vomerine teeth. All right. So basically what you have is the salamander has a heart that's kind of up front here that we'll look at in a second, but all the blood that's oxygenated from the heart travels down the salamander through this big vessel right here called the dorsal aorta, where it goes up into the head through a dorsal aorta as well. But as it travels to the head, it splits off into different areas. Now the first two branches that come off the dorsal aorta as we're moving anterior, those are called the subclavian arteries. Okay? And if you were to follow these all the way out, you would see that they go to the arms of the salamander. So the subclavian arteries are there. You're going to find subclavian arteries in your cat too. Okay? Then the dorsal aorta splits into two main branches. And those splits are called the radices of the dorsal aorta, or the radices of the aorta. A single radix is one of the branches. So at the left and right radices, we have two main branches. We have this first branch, or the most medial branch, is called the vertebral artery, and then the most lateral branch is your internal carotid artery. Okay, so you have your dorsal aorta. It splits first into the subclavian arteries. Then the dorsal aorta branches into two branches called the radices of the dorsal aorta. Each radix has branches in a medial branch, which is called the vertebral artery, and a lateral branch, which is called the inferior or internal carotid artery. Sorry.
Right? Boom, first blood. Jungle starts coming down. This bitch is trapped. She decides to come back. Boom, second blood. Jungle comes. Boom, scared.
So the next thing you want to do is you want to make another little window in your salamander. And what that will expose is a little heart. So far up in the chest cavity, huh?
That blue thing.
The blue thing, yep. Okay, so the heart has, instead of 2 chambers like in the shark, it has 3 chambers. It has 1 ventricle. It has 2 atria. There's 1 atrium that's behind the heart right here. And then there's another atrium that's kind of on the top of the heart right here. Okay, and what you'll see is that the blood travels away from the ventricle toward the dorsal aorta through a vessel that sounds familiar to you guys, the conus arteriosus. Now the conus on the salamander expands a little bit, so you can see it's 1 diameter here, but it kind of bulbs out up here. That's called the bulbus arteriosus. Okay, so blood leaves the ventricle of the heart through the conus arteriosus into the bulbus arteriosus and into the dorsal aortas. So blood actually drains into the right atrium through this big vessel right here. That's called the post cava, inferior vena cava, posterior vena cava, whatever you're comfortable with. But all of that blood from the post cava drains into a similar sinus like on the shark. So it has a sinus venosus too. So all the blood coming from the post cava into the sinus venosus then travels into the right atrium, into the ventricle, up through the lungs and gills. Okay, so it's oxygenated in both the lungs and gills, comes back to the left atrium of the heart, is pumped into the ventricle, and then leaves through the conus arteriosus. So you see in the ventricle you have mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, and so it's a little bit inefficient, but what happens is that the salamander is able to doubly or use 2 different means to oxygenate its blood. It can pump blood to the lungs to get oxygenated, and it can oxygenate its blood through its gills, so that mixing isn't that deleterious. Okay, so after blood leaves the heart, it travels down here through this dorsal aorta. What you're going to notice first is that there's this big branch that comes off and it goes right to the stomach. See it right here? Okay. And actually there are 2 branches, kind of branches into 2 places. There's 1 branch here and 1 branch that goes up here. This big branch, the first branch off the dorsal aorta in the thoracic or abdominal cavity, is called the celiaco-mesenteric artery, and that's spelled weird again with C-O-E. All right, celiaco-mesenteric artery. And what this does is one of the branches, this branch that runs deep on the stomach, is called the gastric artery because it goes to the stomach. And then if you follow this one, you can see it goes right to the spleen. Okay? And so that's the splenic artery. Alright? So the first branch is the celiaco-mesenteric artery. It branches into a gastric artery and a splenic artery. Okay? The next thing you want to do is you want to pick up the mesentery proper that's holding the small intestine to the dorsal body wall, and what you're going to see is a whole lot of red vessels and yellow ones too, and I destroyed my mesentery, but all these red vessels are the mesentery arteries. Okay.